Good evening, everybody. How are you all? So first, we want to go a little bit further, and we want to thank those that gave us the funding to do today's program. And I would like you all to understand that we want to thank Biogen and Teva for giving us an education grant and the sponsorship to do today.
Primeramente tenemos que darle las gracias a todas las compañías que nos han ayudado esta noche. Una de esas compañías son Teva y Biogen. Gracias por su apoyo y por su ayuda monetaria para que este evento sea realizado.
Okay, so our first guest, we're going to ask Moselle Leland to come on up, and she is a disability attorney, and she's going to speak with you for about 20 minutes. She's going to have a slideshow as well. Her presentation is in English.
Y con ustedes la abogado Moselle Leland, ella nos va a ayudar con las preguntas.
Come on up, please.
So good evening, and thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to speak with all of you tonight. So again, my name is Moselle Leland. I'm an attorney with Law Offices of Judith Leland. And tonight I'm going to be speaking with you about the two different disability programs that are provided by the federal government. So as you see here, I'll have one on the left, one on the right. There is what's called Social Security Disability Insurance Benefits, which is also known as SSI or Title II. And then there's Supplemental Security Income Benefits, also known as SSI or Title 16. Now, some of you may already be on benefits, some of you may be in the process of applying, and some of you might not be in the process, but maybe down the road you'll need to apply. So some of this information will apply to some of you, and hopefully there'll be a little bit of information for all of you. So these programs each have the same medical requirements to be approved. And you must be found disabled for both of these programs. And that definition of disability is going to be different than the definition of disability for other programs such as state disability that we have in California and workers' compensation. But first I'm going to go through the differences between these two programs, and I'll be referring to them as SSDI and SSI throughout the program. So as you see on the left, for Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI, it's based on the earnings that you've made and the taxes you've paid into the Social Security system. And generally, you must have worked 5 out of the past 10 years in order to be eligible for this program. So it is important to apply within 5 years after you've stopped working. Otherwise, your eligibility will expire for that program. Now, benefits are paid 6 months after you are found disabled, which means there's a 5-month waiting period. But also, they cannot be paid more than 1 year prior to your application date. So if you were to apply today, you could get approved as of March 21st of 2016. So even if you've been disabled for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, they're only going to go back and pay you 1 year before your application date. And if you are approved for Social Security disability, you will be entitled to Medicare. But it's really important to note that Medicare does not start right away. It starts about 30 months, well, exactly 30 months after your disability onset and after you are deemed eligible. So what that means is that if you have other insurance, private insurance, you're going to need to keep that until the Medicare kicks in. And this can be difficult for people financially. So your dependents, you know, a spouse, a child, may also be eligible for benefits. So the difference is with supplemental security income is that that program is based on your income and your resources. There are limits because SSI is a needs-based program. So if you haven't paid in enough into Social Security or you've never worked but you're disabled, then you would be applying for SSI. And some people will be applying for both concurrently. And we can talk about that if you have more questions about that. But with regards to the income limits, an individual cannot earn more than $735 per month to be eligible and must not have more than $2,000 in resources, meaning money in the bank accounts or retirement accounts and so forth. You are allowed to own your own car and you are allowed to own your own home. So those things won't count against you. For a couple, the amount is a little bit higher. It's about $1,100 a month in income, and the resources are about $3,000. Okay? And benefits for SSI are actually paid more quickly. There's no 5-month waiting period, and SSI benefits are paid from the month after you apply. And Medi-Cal entitlement, Medicaid in other states, will start pretty much right away the month after you apply. One of the differences with SSI is that your dependents, your children, your spouse, will not be eligible for any benefits. Also, this program is generally only available to U.S. citizens. There are some exceptions, so if you are not a citizen and are thinking about applying for SSI, you'll have to talk with someone about that to see if you qualify for one of their exceptions. And before I move on to the next slide, I just want to let you know that all of these programs, applying for all these programs can take quite some time to get approved, so you might be entitled to back pay for the time that you've been waiting. So for SSDI, you will receive that back pay in a lump sum. For SSI, if it's a large amount of back pay, they'll pay you in 3 installments at about 6-month intervals. So just quickly, I'll go over the timeline for an application for Social Security benefits. And first off, you can apply either by phone, in person, or online for SSDI. For SSI, you must do it by phone or in person. But for both of the programs, you can do an appeal online if you would like. And I actually recommend that. I think it's one of the easiest ways to do it. So when you do an initial application, you're going to be waiting about 3 to 6 months to get a response. If you are denied, and over 50% of people are denied at the initial level, then some people will ask for reconsideration and some people will request a hearing before a judge. And this will depend on where you live. Social Security is doing some kind of an experiment to see if it makes sense to skip the reconsideration step. If you do reconsideration, you'll be waiting a good 3 to 6 months to get a response again. And unfortunately, the denial rate at that level is quite high. It's probably anywhere around 70–80%. But one thing to keep in mind is don't be discouraged, because even if you are denied, ultimately, if you are disabled, you will get approved. So if you do have to request a hearing before a judge, right now the wait times are very long. They're about 18 to 22 months, and the wait times have been increasing. Unfortunately, this program is underfunded. There are not enough judges. There's not enough support staff, so those wait times have been growing. So if you are denied at that level, you can appeal again to the Appeals Council, and an appeal at that level takes about 12 to 18 months right now. And then again, if you're denied at the Appeals Council level, you can file a civil suit in federal district court. At that time, you can do a new application as well. But before that, you would not be able to do so. If you are denied at district court, you can appeal further to the Federal Court of Appeals. But that's a lot less common. So now I'm going to move on to some details about the actual program and how to get approved. So for Social Security, of course, you have to show you're disabled and that you're not working. So the definition that they use for disability is the inability to work or engage in what they call substantial gainful activity for at least 12 months. So if you have a condition that has already lasted 12 months or is expected to last 12 months or result in death, then you will qualify. And to show you're disabled, there are different ways to do so. One way is to show that your condition meets one of Social Security's listed impairments. For example, MS is a listed impairment. But, you know, Social Security's listed impairments, it's a book that they have, and they have very specific criteria that you would have to meet, and so it's difficult to meet that exactly. But if you don't meet that, you can still get approved. You would just have to show that you can't do your past work and you can't do other work. And at that point, they would take into account your age, your education, and your work skills, and your medical condition. So, and as I mentioned, you could meet a Social Security listing, but you'd have to meet it exactly, which is very difficult for patients with MS, because MS is something that's often episodic, as you all answered in that survey. And so you might have periods where you're not doing well and periods where you only have a few symptoms or are in remission. So Social Security will take into consideration how often you're having episodes or relapses, how long these are lasting, and the time between episodes, as well as if you have any residual impairments when you are in a remission, to determine if you are disabled. So as I said here, the definition of disability requires that you're not working or not engaging in what they call substantial gainful activity. So why don't we define that briefly? Substantial gainful activity. In general, if you're earning $11.70 a month or more for this year, you will not be eligible. Social Security will say you're engaging in substantial gainful activity. There are exceptions. That's something that gets a little more complicated, but if you are working and you have a lot of expenses due to your condition, then that may put you below $1,170 a month. If you are legally blind, that amount is a bit higher. It's $1,950 a month. But to be substantial gainful activity, it doesn't have to be $11.70 or more. If you're doing work and you're not being paid $11.70, but you should be paid that much, then it will count as substantial work. And for example, also, if you're doing work and not being paid, like you're working for a family member, but that work is usually paid, they will consider you to be working at substantial gainful activity levels. So now I'm going to move on into the evaluation process that Social Security uses to determine whether or not you are disabled. It's a 5-step evaluation. So at step 1, Social Security is going to ask, are you working? And as I mentioned in the previous slide, are you earning $1,170 a month or more? And for previous years, it was lower. So each year they do raise that amount a bit. So if you are not earning $11.70 a month or more, and they don't feel that you're engaging in substantial gainful activity, then they will go on to the second step. If you are considered to be working, then you won't be found disabled. And again, that $11.70 is just a rule of thumb. There are exceptions. And you might be someone who is self-employed, have your own business. Keep in mind that different rules will apply for those who are self-employed. If you have your own business, even if you're not bringing in profits, you may still be considered to be engaging in substantial gainful activity and not qualify. So Social Security then moves on to step 2. If they say you're not working, they'll look at the next step. Do you have what they call a severe impairment? So a severe impairment for Social Security is just anything that is more than minimal. So for example, if you have osteoarthritis, but that's not keeping you from working, that will still be counted as a severe impairment. Whereas a cold or something that's not going to last very long, a broken leg, that's not going to be considered a severe impairment. So if you have a severe impairment, Social Security moves on to the 3rd step in their evaluation. If you don't have a single severe impairment, then the evaluation stops and they say you're not disabled. So moving on to step 3, Social Security will ask, do you have a listed impairment? So, and as I mentioned before, that's not the only way to be approved, but this is one way. So Social Security has this list of medical conditions with very specific limitations and symptoms that you must have in order to be considered disabled. If you don't meet the listing exactly, you may equal a listing. And equaling a listing is more tricky. A Social Security doctor has to find that you equal a listing. But of course, your own doctor's records will play a part in finding whether you equal a listing. So if you do meet or equal a listing, you will be found disabled by Social Security, and the evaluation process stops there. If you are not found to meet or equal a listing, Social Security will go on to figure out what's called your residual functional capacity, or RFC. And your RFC, or residual functional capacity, is the most that you can do despite your medical condition and your limitations. So for example, Social Security is looking at the physical, mental, and other limitations. For physical, they're really interested in knowing how much you can lift, how much you can carry, how long you can sit, stand, walk. And for mental, they're going to be looking at your understanding, your remembering, and carrying out of instructions. And also if you're having difficulty responding appropriately to criticism at work or dealing with work stress. And also important for MS, some people may have vision difficulties, fatigue, or also maybe intolerance to heat, for example. I'll also mention briefly there is something called compassionate allowances, and in theory you should be approved more quickly if you have a condition that's on that list. However, it's still very hard to get a case expedited. I do have a case that met the compassionate allowance listing very recently, and we were able to get a hearing in about 4 or 5 months versus 18 to 22 months, but it still takes some time, even if you have something that is very severe. So compassionate allowance type of condition would be something that is clearly a disability. So there is a form of MS that is on that list, but it's a rare form of MS. It's, I believe it's called malignant multiple sclerosis. So that's not one that's very common. So if you do not have an impairment that meets a listing, as I said, Social Security, I apologize. Social Security will look to see if you can do your past relevant work. Past relevant work is work that you did in the past 15 years before you became disabled or before the decision is being made. If you performed it long enough to learn, and if you performed it at the substantial gainful activity level or earned about $11.70 a month or more for 2017, a little less for previous years. So an individual's residual functional capacity that they determine will be compared to your past work. And Social Security will look to see whether you have the physical and mental abilities to do your past work. If you can't do your past work, then Social Security goes on to the 5th and final step to determine if you're disabled. If you can do your past work, then you're not found disabled. So the last step, step 5, Social Security asks, if you can't do your past work, can you do other work? And you know, this is a little tricky. If you're under 50 years of age, you must show really that you cannot do any kind of work that exists in the national economy. It doesn't matter if you've been doing the same job for 15, 20 years. You know, if you were being paid $25 an hour, you know, if you can do anything, if you can be a toll booth worker and that pays only minimum wage, and you've never done that before, if you're under 50 and you can do it, you're not disabled. If you're over 50 and you can't do your past work, Social Security will then look at not only your residual functional capacity or your limitations and what you still can do, they'll also look at your age and your education and any work skills that you've gained from your past work. So it's a little easier to be approved when you are older. If you are found by Social Security to not be able to do any of your past work, then you have proven that you are disabled. If you can do other work, you will not be found disabled. So sometimes people will come in and ask me, you know, I've been out of work 9 months, but I'd really like to see if I can try to work. So, you know, that's something that is a little bit complicated, but it's good to keep in mind that sometimes the work that you do after you stopped working will not be held against you, and you could still be eligible for benefits. So if you earn more than $1170, what they'll look at is if you stopped working for at least a month because of your condition, then you tried to work again, but you were not able to continue to do so you did so for 6 months or less, and then you had to stop working because of your condition, this would be called an unsuccessful work attempt. And this is very important for people because you might want to try to go back to work, but you're not sure if you're going to be able to. And Social Security has this rule because they want to encourage people to try to work. Okay? So, as I mentioned, one way to get approved is meeting exactly one of the listings. And multiple sclerosis is one of the listed impairments, but it's very hard to get approved based on that listing. And I have it up here. To meet that listing, you must show an inability to control the movement of at least 2 extremities, either your arm and leg, or both arms, or both legs. And you must show that you have extreme difficulty in the ability to balance while standing or walking, or an extreme difficulty standing from seated position, or an extreme difficulty using the upper extremities. If you don't meet any of those criteria, you could be found disabled with this listing showing that you have marked limitation in physical functioning and in one of the following, in your thinking, interacting, and finishing tasks. And there are other listings that Social Security may use, but if other body systems were affected. So good to keep that in mind as well. So now and I have those listed here, for example, the vision listing. And as I mentioned, if you don't meet one of these listings exactly, you just have to show that your residual functional capacity prevents you from working. So now I want to talk about one of the important parts, how to build your case. And this applies to people who also already are on benefits, but may be worried about a continuing disability review, which is done usually about every 3 years, depending on your case. Okay, so as Stuart mentioned, it's crucial to have a good relationship with your doctor. If you don't feel like you're being listened to, if you don't feel respected, you should get another doctor. And just keep in mind that a diagnosis of MS in itself is not enough to be approved for benefits. You must show impairment-related limitations. And you should have objective tests showing that you have MS, such as an MRI or a spinal tap. And I would keep up to date on those MRIs to show if you've had any deterioration. Now, make sure that you go to your doctor on a regular basis and tell your doctor all of your symptoms. For example, let your doctor know if you have any difficulties with sitting, standing, or walking, if you're fatigued, if you have to lie down, things like that. Get a copy of your medical records so that you know if your doctor is adequately documenting these things. I highly recommend that you keep a journal and share that journal with your doctor. You want to keep track of your good and bad days and symptoms you're having. And also, if you're working, keep track of your sick days if you need to apply in the future. So you also should ask your doctor to complete a questionnaire. And if you have any questions about that, ask me after we talk about that, okay? Social Security may send you to one of their doctors, and you should go, but keep track of things like the amount of time your doctor spends with you and what tests are done, if any. Social Security will send you a lot of forms to fill out, and just make sure that you don't sound better than you are. Make sure you realize this is not a job application. So think about how you feel on a bad day. Let Social Security know if you're getting any help from family or friends to do household chores, make meals, take care of kids or pets. When you do your work history report that they will send you, very important, if you were not a lead worker, don't say that you were. You don't want to say that you had more duties than you had, or it will be more difficult to be approved. Lastly, people will often ask if they should get an attorney in this process. If you have a really clear-cut case, for example, if you meet a listing exactly, I would say perhaps you don't need an attorney. Try it on your own, and if you're denied, at that point, I would suggest getting an attorney. If you feel like it's too stressful of a process, you may choose to get one at the outset. And I don't know if I have a minute left or, okay. So keep in mind, you do not pay attorney's fees unless you are approved. So you don't have to pay anything up front, so don't feel like you can't afford an attorney. The attorney's fees are regulated by statute. The fees are 25% of any back pay that's owed to you, with a maximum of $6,000 if you're approved at any of those levels I discussed, initial, reconsideration, or hearing. It's 25% without the $6,000 cap if the attorney has to go beyond the judge level. So if you have any other questions,
Let's thank Moselle for coming here today.
If you were approved for SSDI, through your spouse, your spouse was approved, and would getting married affect your benefits?
and what kind of benefit? SSDI, did you say, or SSI?
SSDI.
Okay, SSDI, no. Your spouse getting married would not affect your benefits.
So she would still.
Right. If she were on SSI, getting married would affect it because they would look at your income. But SSDI is not based on income.
Good question. Anybody? I'm sure there are questions here. How could you possibly all know everything?
Well, I do also want to let you know I have brochures at the back that will summarize some of the Social Security process if you would like to take one. And of course, if you have any other questions, feel free to call or email my office. And that will be on the brochures and on this slide.
Well, thank you again for coming.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me to speak.
So everybody, I want to thank you all again for coming down here today. It was very important that we were able to do this for all of you. And again, I want to thank Biogen and Teva for allowing us or having us make this possible to bring out to all of you today as well. We do hope that you fill out those seminar evaluation forms and that you let us know what you liked about this program or not liked about this program so that we can hopefully come back again in another year and bring you more information. Okay? Thank you.